readings for Asha for Education, and we have 4 panelists today. We're just going to start a discussion with them and just talk about some of the issues that revolved around them. So do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Stephanie Sponzo. I'm a junior here. I'm a political science major, and I currently live in Hartford.
Hi everyone. For those of you who know, my name is Kathy Villeda. I'm a junior here at UConn. I'm an individualized major in health and social inequality, so I have a minor in human rights.
Hi, my name is Farzana. I'm a senior here, and my major is Human Development and Family Studies with a double minor in Human Rights and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies.
Hi, I'm Shimona. I'm a junior. I'm studying computer science and minoring in digital arts.
Let's give them a thank you. Round of applause. And our facilitator for the discussion is going to be Dhruv Shah, and he's on board with Asha this year as well. So, yeah. Thank you, Dhruv. Okay.
Do you want to ask?
Oh, no, I'm just going to go
So I guess I just wanted to open up with you guys first. What did you think of the film? Does anybody have any thoughts, initial reactions? Were there any stories that resonated with you?
I thought it was very powerful, especially because like the beginning it was just like it was more sad at the beginning, and then it kind of went into more uplifting stories. Because at the beginning, you know, I was about to cry. 'Cause, like
Yeah, it was
that was hard to watch, especially the second girl. What was her name? Sumar or something? Sumar was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, her.
Yeah, Suma.
What was your initial reaction to the movie?
Anyone else? Tia?
I think my initial reaction, I didn't really know what to expect from the movie, or the documentary, but I think that it was so unreal. Like, it didn't seem like, especially some of the stories. Like, I remember when I was talking to Anne, when they were showing the knife or the sword pointing, it didn't seem like that actually happened. So it's really shocking to kind of, I guess part of me feels like we live in this bubble. We don't really realize the kind of stories and the kind of things that girls this age go through.
Yeah, and I really like how in a lot of the stories they showed through the girl's perspective. So with the knife scene, they didn't outright say that she was raped until later, because that's what it feels like too. They don't have words for that. So that was a thing that I really liked. Any specific stories that anybody, other than Sia said the knife story, anyone else? No? Okay. So I guess we'll just go down and ask each of the panelists one question, but then all of you can pitch in and answer. Then we want it to be a very dynamic conversation between everybody. So the panelists are just here to direct the conversation, sort of. We want to involve them.
Yeah, so feel free whenever you have an opinion or you want to say something, just raise your hand or just start talking. So you can be involved as well.
Yeah. So the first question is, do you think education is a legitimate and sustainable solution to the barriers girls face in the film and around the world, and why or why not?
Do you want
I mean, if anybody...
If anyone has
some,
some, yeah. You can start.
Okay, yeah. I think that the obvious answer is yes from the film. And I think that the statistic that kind of shocked me the most, or was the most lasting to me, is if it was the one about India. If India increased its education just 1 more % of the population of girls, they would increase their GDP by 5.5 billion, which is a huge number. So that just goes to show that women and girls are really the people who are putting those efforts to work, and they're the ones that kind of manifest education in this way that completely changes communities. So yes, the short answer is
yeah.
Yeah. Does it go on to me?
Anyone can talk, either of you. We're just going to talk about the first question for him.
Yeah, I mean, along with stuff, I definitely think the answer is yes. I know, I've done a lot of education equity, in high school, advocacy work, and I remember we were discussing how it's important for women and girls to be educated, because gender norms are oftentimes the ones to raise children. So having like that education allows us to better raise our children and then like encourage them to go off and like have an education and then it kind of just like it's like this cycle, like right, to like slowly break away from poverty, and like just like really increase like social mobility. So yeah, along with stuff, I definitely found like the fact about India enrolling 1% higher of girls into secondary education was like very shocking to me.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with like education is that the accessibility needs to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So like you can't have just like education and then like, oh, like girls without money can't go to school. Like there needs to be like more structural or policy-based reforms around education to make it accessible for everyone who's trying to get an education. Also, like, again, like, with that, it's not only can they be socially mobile and move up in their lives and, like, make a lot of money or do whatever, it's also, like, individually being able to say, knowing that, like, there are situations that you can say no to. There are things that, like, you can have. It, like, takes you out of a system of, like, learned helplessness, of being, like, oh, I'm here, I can't do anything. When you have an education, that really breaks down all these systems that say that you can't do something. So education is the most sustainable and legitimate way of uplifting our girls, but it's difficult when you have all these other structures that are kind of not allowing that to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Going off of that, I've always believed that education is one of the biggest factors between like taking charge of your own life or like versus having someone take a charge for you, you know? So like being aware of what options you have and what you can do with your career, your life, that's like one of the biggest factors, just being aware of it. So, and also when I think of education, I don't necessarily just think of schooling. I think of it more of like the way you were raised with your values and how you kind of view the world, how you view yourself within it, and like confidence and all those kind of things come with being like a well-educated person. I mean, that's, again, down the line, we're trying to just get to schooling first, but I think that's also really important is how we raise our women and how we raise them to view each other and raise them to view like men and how their places in society. So that's also really crucial, is like knowing that they have worth and they have value. Because once they know that they are valued people just as much as men and just as much as anybody else, then they'll kind of want to go out of their way to take charge of their education, take charge of their life. And also, I don't think just together as like, this is, women's education is like a humanity problem. I don't think it's just like a women's problem. Because I don't think it's possible for us to all progress if half of our gender is being held back, you know, and the movies show like how much just changing one woman's life through education can change so much else. We bear the next generation, you know, we could potentially impact so many other people. So yeah, I think it's just a problem for everybody in general. I don't think it's just women.
Does anyone want to add on to that?
Yeah, when we talk about education, it's like a very broad term a lot of times. You can educate, there's like formal education, there's education about how, you know, the whole bonded labor thing. If the girl was just educated on that, maybe she would understand that it was all wrong. So I like what you said about, you know, there's different aspects of education that really can change the cycle. Any other?
I agree with that, because I think a lot of times when we're talking about education, we tend to focus on like math, science, history, and really book learning. But a lot of it is if you're learning all that in a closed-minded environment where like you still don't know the options that you have and independence that you can take, then what's the point of even having those skills? So like that was a good point.
Yeah, like whenever I think of what I'm most thankful for in terms of the way I think or how I am, I don't really think of like, oh, that thing that I learned in like stats class like last semester. Like it's never really, that's not what comes to mind. It's more of like, I'm so thankful that my mom taught me this, or like my dad raised me with this value. So I think that's really important.
Also, like the arts education. So like having like that story of Roxana with her being able to doodle in class and having like or poetry, or being able to express yourself through art and having that be a part of your formal education or be a part of the way that you navigate the world. It's very powerful. That's like, and I think we tend to devalue that sort of education as well, where you were able to find liberation through art. And so I think not only does the education have to be comprehensive and holistic, it has to include like notions of what we can do through art, what we can do through poetry. So.
Of course. Another thing that I think is really important is giving girls and women an education, but making sure that that education also includes how they can help other girls rise up. So, events exactly like this, where you have, women who are educated saying, I'm going to use my power and my education to make sure that I'm informing the communities around me of how other girls don't have these opportunities. So, learning about math and science and history is all great, but if you don't learn about the parts of history and the parts of, global issues that are happening, even though, people in your community might be getting an education, what is that education really accomplishing for the girls who don't have the, access to those privileges? So, kind of just like another way to speak to how powerful, things like this are, to say we're going to use the education that we have and the privilege that we have to help other girls rise up.
That's a really good point. This entire event is a form of education for you guys, for me, for everyone. If no one has any,
Yeah, let's add something to that. You know how in the second girl, Suma, where she was on the bike, she was like in the front, and then all the other girls were falling behind. So I feel like if one person can impact the other girls around them, then those other girls will follow that one person and impact more other people.
it's like kind of like positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
That's why you never want to go into an area, or you never want to come in as like a savior. You never want to come in and be like, we're just going to give you an education. It's more about uplifting the people within the community and having them uplift each other. And it's not about us as Westerners or anything like that saving people or giving them an education, because it's much more sustainable when it's within the community itself.
Sustainable education is a big issue, especially for, like you said, the Western mindset is to just go in, maybe put down some schools, and maybe that'll fix everything. But in the end, we need to empower them from within. Okay. So the next question, I guess for the next panelist and then for everybody, is what role do men and boys play in the movement for girls' education and women's empowerment? And I have some follow-up questions, but let's start with that.
Okay. Well, I think based off the film, they obviously play a very big role. Which at least in my perspective, it it just sucks, right? To think that as women, our movement to get education needs to be validated by the support of men. That just shows how the world is so misogynistic and patriarchy everywhere, right? It sucks that it's not like that, but it's also very important for the men who are around us to recognize your male privilege. It is a privilege that you are a male, so stand up and use your voice to elevate us. Don't necessarily yes, fight for us, but don't do all the work for us. Find the resources to help us to really raise ourselves up and learn to fight for ourselves, how Farzana was saying, sustainable education, right? But also sustainable relationships between men and women and girls and men, and there's a certain power dynamic there that needs to be recognized, and so it's important, I think, for men to really be out there and educate yourself on why it's so important for women and girls to have an education, right? Don't belittle us because that's what we want, and we don't want to be a mom and get married young, right? Let's be real. I've come through that so many times where I'm criticized by so many men because I'm in school and because I plan to be in school for a while. They're like, don't you want to get married? Don't you want to start a family? And it's I can start a family when I'm 30. I don't need to be 21. So it's stop making those comments. Let's start small, right? Stop making those comments, right? Don't say that to your little sister. Don't say it to your cousin, right? Or even if you have a little cousin who likes to play with Legos, don't tear her down because she likes to play with Legos and like not Barbies or dolls, you know, like encourage them to like really use their imagination and like break away from gender norms and yeah, like really, really recognize your privilege and like where like how deep it's instilled in this society and like we do need your help, right, to like push forward.
So I'd say within this room of people, there are a certain type of men who came and watched this movie. You're a certain type of people who are here, and you're willing to be educated, and you're willing to be open-minded. But there's a lot of people out there who aren't the same. So the thing is, like masculinity and the thing is with like masculinity and like male privilege and all this other things, like it's born within the relations that you form with each other. So in terms of the way that you interact with men, it sanctions all these different types of behaviors. So I think the thing that we need to do, or y'all need to do as men, is to be saying, be that one person who speaks up and says, yo, like, stop, that's fucked up, like that sort of thing. Like, it's also about your individual interactions with other men. And so, yes, a lot of it has to do with the relations to other women as well, but I think within each other, there's a certain type of bond that's formed, and certain types of behaviors that are sanctioned within your groups of people. So when it comes to like men and what they can do and what they're supposed to do, I think it just honestly needs to start within yourselves, because that's where it's reproduced, that's where it's informed, that's where you understand yourselves as men. You don't understand it from what we are as women and how you interact with us. It's like your father taught you a certain thing, or like your uncle taught you a certain thing, your teacher taught you a certain thing. And so you gotta break all that down and be super conscious about the way that you interact with the world. So that's where I think being a male, or having been assigned male at birth, or like, I don't know, whatever sort of identity that we inhabit, you need to be conscious of it. And you also have to be willing to be aware of your relation to people who are marginalized. And then at that point, speak to the people who are also in positions of privilege along with you. That's what I think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think like you're not born to look at a gender a certain way. You're kind of taught that way based on your friends and how you're raised. But going off of that, I was thinking about the one girl movie whose father like encouraged her to draw and like bought her a notebook and everything, and she was so scared that she was going to get punished. That really stood out to me in particular because, well, for thousands of years, I feel like men have been taught to look at it a certain way and like been the more dominating or more controlling gender, and like women have been more like docile and kind of been in response to men. So seeing that happen where a man was kind of going out of his way to encourage a woman rather than like put her down, that stood out to me a lot. And of course that's not like uncommon, like we see that a lot on campus, and I don't think it's as much of a problem here, but yeah, I definitely do think men play a huge part, because knowing that they're going out of their way to kind of break past that gender stereotype makes a huge difference, because women can raise other women and that's happening, but to see a man go out of his way to do it, that means a lot more, I think.
Yeah, so just to add one more quick thing. So I see the role of men within feminism as essentially just like any other movement for equality, where you have an oppressed group and a dominant group. So you kind of leave it to the women, not the white women, so not me but them. You know, the women to create the agenda, define the movement, be the voice, and you get their information from the women, and you disseminate that information throughout male spaces. So, you know, like as a white woman, I consider it my responsibility to speak with white people about, you know, issues that people of color face. And I don't think that it's, you know, my role or any white person's role to say, well, I think we should do this or this or this. You know, that's not my place. But, you know, as a woman, that's kind of the space where you say, well, this is my experience, I've lived this. So, you know, the men get their information from groups of women and then kind of take it and talk to men, talk to, you know, your sons, talk to your friends, because that's kind of where you start to create those relationships that have trust, you know, because, you know, men need to, you know, have conversations within themselves, you know, in their own groups in order to kind of have the movement be effective. And like Kathy said, that's kind of a shame sometimes, but that is, the way any effective movement is. So, yeah.
And I think, like branching off of like what Farzana said, like interactions, like even if you think about it and I think this goes back to like the first question as well, like why educating girls is important. Like when you're in the workforce, right, like let's say you're like in a field where you're like interacting with all different people, right, and like it's only men, like that's not going to be effective if it's only men working there, because you don't have different perspectives and different lived experiences. Like that's just how it is that like women and men just have different perspectives. Like we live together obviously amongst each other, but we just have different experiences with life. So like how can you really connect with so many people if you're just constantly like excluding women out of the conversation, right? And like from the same opportunities that you have. And then like also like going off of like the film, like how men play very important roles. Like there are multiple times throughout the film where I felt very fearful and like just scared for the girl. Like if I felt like they were going to get in trouble, I would instantly like just expect them to like get hit by their dad or like their older brother because they made a mistake, right? Like they were doodling in class. And like that, it's like that fear that's just kind of like instilled like in me, I guess, because you know that men have this power, and then to see that like their dads or like their brothers like took a very different approach and were very understanding and loving and caring and like just nourishing, right? Like recognizing that like art is very important for the growth of someone, like seriously. And so like the film really helped me like analyze it again, back to like that power dynamic, right? Like I knew that like that the dad or the brother had the power to like either make the situation better or worse, and like I just assumed that it was going to be like worse, but thankfully it wasn't, right? So
It's sad that a lot of these gender norms or behaviors that we tend to see are so like socially constructed. Like I agree, when I saw that, like I was talking to Anne and I was like, oh my god, he's gonna hit her. Like, that was the first thing that came to my mind. But it's so like socially ingrained in us to think that it's because of that power hierarchy that's what's gonna happen. But if we can just change that type of mindset, I think that's like a big part of the change as well. That it's not always that the man is gonna have power. Sometimes there are nourishing people, there are people willing to help. So
Yeah, it's a very practical way of looking at, because a lot of people, you say all these things and it's all theoretical and you can't really implement it in your own life. And I know a lot of us as men, we're brothers, we are brothers, we are friends of men, we might be fathers of children. So I think what everybody said here is very important for us to kind of be leaders and I guess defy the gender norms or societal norms that have been put on us up until this point.
Also, intersectionality is very important. So I understand like there's also like you can be men, but you can be men of color, and you can be Indian men or Bangladeshi men or black men. Like that informs the way that you play out masculinity. So again, be conscious of not only your maleness, but also how does your other social positions affect the way that you interact with the world, and that will and that's a lot of consciousness raising, a lot of like education within yourself to like understand who you are. But when you have that understanding of yourself, you can definitely be more effective in the change that you want to implement in the world.
Anyone from the audience have any visions? I think that's also a good point, that you have to start, it's like an awareness of yourself, right? It's an understanding of people, the person you are and the people around you, and that just affects many things, not just this issue. It's just a general theme that you should be more aware, more conscious of who you are in the world and what role you play in the world. I'll go on to the next question. No one has any additions. So the next question for Zana is, in the film, many of the young girls' mothers have been oppressing their daughters. How is gender-based violence internalized within the same gender? And why do you think this happens? And maybe can you draw from examples in other people's lives or your own life that you've experienced this?
Yeah.
So the thing is, like, we aren't ever born in a vacuum. Like, we are a product of whatever history that we have. We're a product of our family. We're a product of whatever. So if you're raised with a certain type of value, you're obviously going to reproduce that value. And like, you're going to, that's, again, importance of education, because, like, then you can be critical of those values. So, yeah, like, obviously, like, you have some sort of stake in, like, treating, like, raising your girls a certain way, thinking that, oh, this would be the best for them, because no parent is there going, like, I want to oppress my daughter. No parent is thinking, like, I want to actively denigrate them and I'm going to actively make their lives harder. No, they think, like, we think, as with our children, this is what's going to be best for them. So, like, my mother thinks it's best for me to have an arranged marriage. I'm like, no. but that's the thing, like, she has a certain mindset because that's the way that she was raised, and I'm not gonna say that it's wrong, because, like, that's the way that's her lived experience, that's her reality. The way that we can do that is have this open conversation with other women as well, like, because, like, to expect women to already be aware of everything is an expectation that, like, is kind of unrealistic, because, again, education was a thing. So, I'm thinking of, like, femicide as a very much a thing that exists in this world as well, where, like, in honor killings, like, women participate in honor killings as well. And it's a horrible reality, but once again, like, we are reproducing, and we are part of the culture that we are born into, and you're part of the family that we're born into. So that's why education is really important. And yeah, I don't know, that's pretty much.
That's good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyone want to add to that? Yeah, sure.
One of the scenes that they showed in the film that really, like, I was kind of shocked by it was the fact when the girl's name, but her mom gave birth to her. The first thing that she found out about was her gender. And when she found out that she was a girl, she started to cry and pushed the baby to the side. When I first saw that, I wondered, how could a mother ever feel that way? Or thinking immediately after she gives birth that she doesn't want, a child, especially because she's a girl. And growing up in a family dynamic where all both your parents show you so much love, no matter even my own sister and a lot of my girl cousins I have around the area. It comes to a point where you see that your own family dynamic has a huge influence in the way in which you treat other people and how you interact with others. Because sometimes we always talk about these kind of sensitive issues, and people can belittle each other. But at the same time, throughout this film, if you watch the trend, it was very encouraging. Especially when there was, I believe Sia pointed out, was when that girl talked about becoming a superhero. All of us knew internally that, oh my God, she got a baby. But at the same time, showing that she, even despite that horrible experience, she was able to fight it and still stay strong. That's what was prevalent in that entire, in her story. And one thing I can say with my own personal experience is that when, like, for example, my dad, the way in which I was raised is I look up to my parents more than anyone, because the way they raised me was treat people the way you want to be treated. Exactly what most people's parents would teach them. And when someone, especially with the whole gender bias that exists, not even if it's not as, visible here in this country itself, because how much changes happen, it's always going to be in other countries, and including India too. And one thing I know is that I would never want to treat another woman or anyone, or kind of tell someone that they can't do something just because of their gender, their race, or what they believe in, or their orientation, because that's not our role to decide that, because because they say you need to be the change, like God said, you need to change you should see in the world, otherwise you're not going to see anything. And raising awareness and showing people that you will do whatever it takes to help them, that's what matters. And the way I'm going about this is that when we look at education, like, one thing I was greatly happy to see was when you thought the father's going to punish the daughter, but then he encouraged her to continue drawing. A lot of those times, like, especially with, like, the common stereotypes where especially like for me itself, it's like whether you be a doctor, you're an engineer, or a lawyer. Like there's no other option you can choose. But at the same time, when you have to think internally and see, is it really a career that you want to, because are you passionate about your career or are you just doing it for the money? And that's a huge, huge dilemma that still exists. But people have started to change, and I believe our generation itself is showing how much we can grow, and it shows that we are starting to think about what's actually happening in society itself.
I'd just like to add a quick thing. So like we've been talking a lot about like the responsibility and the roles of fathers or men around you, your mothers, and the people that you're surrounded by. But something that I recognized through the Real Lessons film was that so much of it comes internally too. A lot of the female public figures that we've seen, like Malala that we talked about last year, or Wadley and Suma in this movie, a lot of it came through their own persistence. Like she refused to be like, no, like if her mom was like, don't, you can't go to school, the teacher was like, you don't have money. It was her persistence that sort of pushed through. So much of it also has to do with like educating people, like when we first started talking about this, to educating girls to be independent and persistent, and you know, I have this voice and I have control over my life. A lot of it is really teaching them that you know, you should be courageous, you should be brave, and you should really stand for yourself. And a lot of this oppression really shuts down that voice. So,
Just to comment really quickly on the idea of internalized oppression, it sucks. It sucks so bad. You know, and even as a white woman, I have spent years trying to unlearn, you know, harmful behavior and harmful stereotypes that I've internalized throughout my life without even realizing it. And it's kind of like the more effort you put into fighting against those learned behaviors, the more you uncover and the more you realize how deeply ingrained they are. So, you know, like small things, you know, down to trying to look in the mirror and feel like the person you're looking at is somebody that you like. Somebody, you know, feeling like you can be confident and feeling like the things that you do are enough and not the way that you look, you know, is always the kind of the most important thing. So yeah, just to kind of comment on the question, I think that that's something that is a conversation you can only have with yourself, you know, deciding what are the things that I do that are harmful to me as a woman, and how can I change those things, and how can I have conversations with other women about how I can, you know, stop oppressing myself, you know, these sort of things.
Yeah, and I think like it's really important to empower ourselves and really educate ourselves, because if we don't learn to like tear down this like internalized oppression, how can we possibly lift up other women, right? Like that's just not going to work out. Like you will unintentionally like belittle them if you don't learn how to like break away from that. And I say that off experience. Like I reflect a lot on like when I started to work on like education equity surrounding women, and I had still not learned to like empower myself and like really like tear down that like internalized oppression. And I'm like, oh my God, how dare I say those things? Like, what the hell is wrong with me, right? But no one taught me that like there is such thing as internalized oppression, right? And so like, and like learning to work yourself through it, and like find other women if that's what you need. Like find other women to help you uplift your voice, right? And then like going back to like the mothers, right? Like, and that gender bias, like at least like from myself, and I know like for Asana, we've had conversations where we're like, oh, well, we've learned to kind of tear down this oppression within us, and so we feel more comfortable talking to our moms now, and like saying like, hey, that doesn't really work with me because X, Y, and Z, this is why it's problematic, right? And like even talking to like my sister who grew up in Guatemala, so we had very different experiences, right? And it's like also learning how to like talk about it with other women in our family without like degrading our culture, you know, especially as people of color, right? Here in the US specifically, right? Like without like saying like, what you taught me through my culture is wrong. Like, no. I mean, yes, right, it could be, but like that's not a reason for you to like westernize your culture. So like all these things, like again, intersectionality, like all these things come together, right? Like the way you present yourself, the way you talk to other folks, the way you present your culture, the way you perceive it. So, yeah.
I would say like, all in all, just don't give up on your parents. Like, even with that, like, because like it's like we always talk about like the younger generation is of the future. They're the ones who are going to be progressing, but our parents don't stop existing, and they're still interacting with the world in a certain way. And you always want to, if you can, and if you have the ability to, always have that dialogue there, where your mother can be like raising her consciousness as well. Like growing up with my mom and having me spouting all this like radical stuff all the time, she's gotten a lot better, and she's gotten more kind and accepting of certain types of lifestyles and certain types of people, and like it's always so nice to see that like even years and years of like just fighting with her and butting heads with her, and like eventually like just seeing like, oh, there's progress even within the older generation. Like you don't, again, like we never want to forget that the older generation doesn't stop existing when you start existing, right?
And they're the ones in power. Like if you think about it, right? Like yes, we're the next generation, but who are the people in power right now? It's our parents. I mean, it's mostly like white people, but like they're the ones who are in power. Like seriously, though, let's think about government, right? Or like even here at UConn, like who's like in Susan's like board, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like it's like, so it's important to still educate them. Like so, Fernanda made like a really good point.
Yeah, I think also like as a woman, I feel like you have a responsibility to empower other women, or you should feel like you have the responsibility. I feel like way too often I've seen a lot of like disconnect between women, whereas like it could be about like competition or jealousy or just like very petty things, which I really don't find as much within like males. I feel like they're kind of, I don't know, they can kind of get along in a different way. There's like more of a brotherhood, but I feel like there needs to be more of a sisterhood between women, and we need to kind of like come together in that sense, because I don't think it's going to be difficult to tackle an issue as big as like gender inequality if like our gender itself is divided. So yeah, if we could kind of get past like the pettiness that and that's been happening since for like years and years, just because we've grown up with certain roles, and we've been grown up to kind of like view ourselves in terms of men and like in terms of our beauty and things like that. But breaking past that and realizing that this is an issue for all of us, and like it's not about like me versus you, or like I need to be better or anything like that. It's like we need to all kind of come together and lift everybody up. So.
A big part of everything is also just being aware by reading the news, watching TV, watching reliable news channels if there are any.
Fake news.
But just like, because if you can't find a source of empowerment from somewhere, from someone, you can always turn to books and text. And I know it's really like a lot of people hate reading, but I think it's very important for us to read about different people's experiences. So anyone have any other contributions?
I feel like it all starts like domestic. Like when we think about change, we always think like on a big scale, but like in reality, it starts like, oh, you teach your kids a certain thing, like, and then they like pass it on to their kids or their friends, or like, I feel like it's like the domino effect in that sense. Like, for example, like my dad always tells me my grandfather had 2 boys and a girl, and so when he had a girl, like I don't know, in India, like they bring like sweets or whatever to the office, and everyone like during when he had 2 boys, he like everyone ate the sweets, but like when he had a girl, he brought sweets, people would take it and throw it out, like they would like totally disregard it, and we'd be like, oh no, you shouldn't be happy about having a girl, like what's up with that? And then like I guess like my grandfather was like, okay, like, that's really like screwed up, like that's not okay. And then so he taught his kids to like empower women, and like he taught his daughter to like know your value, and like they pass it on to their kids, and I feel like that's how change happens.
Yeah, definitely. That's like a good takeaway just in general. Just start small, start in your own life.
Personal is political.
So I guess like the common theme here is that a lot of the change does start within the family. It does start by your roots and how your parents kind of raise you.
And even just like your day-to-day
Interaction.
life and interactions is so important. Like how are you choosing to interact with a certain woman, or what words you're using to describe her actions, or what are you, like for a male, like locker room talk, that kind of stuff. Like that is, you'd be surprised how important that actually is. It's like, how are you telling other men to talk about women? That's very critical, because that's a part of men's life that we can't really help, we can't really get to when women aren't there, just like men amongst other men. Like, how are you choosing to describe a certain woman, or how are you choosing to like lift her up or put her down? Because other men see that and they kind of like go off of that. So just in like your everyday little interactions are also super important.
And it's difficult, you know, for like, you know, when all the guys are saying something and you to be the only guy, you know, be like, hey, that's not okay. I totally understand that's difficult, but I think
To
it's
be the
all
type
right.
of ally you are is who you are when there's nobody in the room that's going to be negatively affected by something that's being said. So, you know, to be that one person in the room that says something, even if there's nobody in the room that's going to pat you on the back for it or say congrats, you're a good ally, or to, you know, to be validated, because you're not in it for validation, right? You're in it because you care about people and you want people to be able to thrive regardless of, you know, or not in spite of their identity, but because of their identity, to thrive because we have differences and because those differences are what make people unique and awesome.
And by differences, we don't just have to talk about gender here. Like there's a lot of intersectionality again. The movie showed a lot of cycles of poverty, so differences in your economic standards and your social standards, and being aware of all.
Okay, so the next question is a little difficult. Good luck. But but everybody can contribute to it. The question is, do countries such as the USA have a responsibility to address the global issue of unequal access to education for girls? And if so, how? And what is their role? Anybody can. I mean, did you have something? Or-
Yeah.
Okay, she can start then.
Yes, I definitely think that developed countries specifically have a huge role because they have a voice more so than like underdeveloped countries. And I know America loves to get in everybody's business, so I'm sure they wouldn't mind like using their voice and their power to kind of empower other women and like bring more awareness of it. And Michelle Obama had a huge campaign on all of this, so we see it happening, but I think it's very critical that they're using their authority and their power for good things like this. So, and they have the resources and the money to kind of go out of their way to make this happen.
I say yes because half the reason that there's so much poverty and so many issues in a lot of these like underdeveloped countries is because of colonization and because of the powers that the global north has and the destabilization of certain governments, certain foreign governments, and like no, it's honestly, it was like a lot of it has to do with how the global north exploited the labor and exploited the people of these global south countries. So yes, they do have a responsibility to own up to it and be like, you're at fault for why a lot of these countries are suffering. But again, it also has to be like, we also don't want, again, like that white savior, like, oh, we're gonna save these barbaric brown people, like that's, like you also want to be cognizant of that because like a lot of people who do go into do like Peace Corps work or do like humanitarian work don't realize that there is a power dynamic there. There's a reason why you have more resources. It's not because they're just like, it's just happened that way. There's a whole history of colonization, a whole history of intergenerational transmission of poverty. So I'd say in terms of like human rights conventions and like the way that like the UNHCR and like the UN is funded like mostly by the US, like they do have a distinct responsibility to own up to the fact that like a lot of refugee crises occur because of violent decolonizations, and that like it again like yeah I'm very passionate about this, but they do have a responsibility.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And again, like going with the whole like white savior complex thing, right? It's like you're not. I feel like a lot from what I've heard, like the U.S. like goes into this to these different countries and they really try to impose like our values and our beliefs on like, you know, barbaric brown people. When like that's not the truth. Like you should like we should be working alongside people, not like just going in and being like, this is the right way, because our lives are so different, like our experiences, our culture, like that's just the way it is, right? So it's like being mindful of like I definitely think like the U.S. like needs to work more alongside like community members and like help empower them and work with them and say like, you work with the community, like what do you think they need and how can we help? What are the resources that we have that you really need to like get through this, right? And like talk to government officials, right? And like it's even like how the U.S. like exploited people, like a lot of U.S. like corporations still exploit people. I mean, like think about the clothes that we're wearing, right? What is the likelihood that this like sweater or cardigan, my pants, that they come from like a sweatshop in like Bangladesh? Very high, right? And like that's unfortunate to think that, right? So it's like not only holding our government like accountable, but like holding like corporations, because capitalism and like exploitation. I definitely think the U.S. like plays a really big role in it, right? And yeah, just like being aware that we should be working alongside people.
So like personally, as someone who's not exposed to or like involved in how like the logistics of these things work, do you have any ideas on like how, like an example of how we can actually help? Like yes, it's our responsibility, but like can you guys give me some examples?
I went to South Africa for a study abroad trip once, and there was they have things called townships, which are like they're basically the slums, but like it's where like a lot of the African Black people end up living and who are in situations of poverty, and the idea, a lot of people who wanted to go in and help, but kind of just change up the entire structure of the township, and without really listening to the voices of the people who actually live in the township, like, like they don't want a certain like say like culturally there's like certain like women can't like bathe in front of men or something like that, like those sorts of things. Like if you come in with the mindset like, oh, like this is how I live my life, therefore, and it's like a great life that I'm living, and therefore if I change their structure to incorporate like my way of living, it is not sustainable. It doesn't really affect any change. So definitely you go in with the idea that like what do the people want? You always go in with with what can we do to maintain human dignity, and what can we do to like listen to the people, like because like that's the whole point of this, is that like it's not about saving people. It's not about like imposing our ideals. It's about like uplifting people who are in marginalized positions. So yeah, that's why I think like big NGOs and like UN and like all these people, they need to start listening to what the people want. Have victim participation and all these types of things.
I mean, even here at UConn, like I went on a Global Brigades trip, and again, like they go to places in Central and South America, and it's about educating them in a way that's sustainable, so that we don't have to keep going back every now and then, because it's like they should be sustainable when we're not there.
Yeah.
And I was talking to the director of the program about why they don't have such programs in countries like India, and it's just that the social structure is completely different. Like you can't just go there and impose what you think is going to create change. There's a completely different system for that. So yeah, that's right.
That's why you should like discuss it with people who are in positions, not in positions of power, but who are like a part of the community.
Yeah.
That's the thing with South Africa. That was the issue, was that like part of it was that the men were the only ones who were talking from that community. But like you gotta start somewhere. But yeah, so.
Yeah, and I think that's like a good example, because like the way I see it, when like we as like the global north like really try to impose like Western like lifestyles and like I guess the global south, right? That to me is like another form of like recolonization, like very settled, right? Like maybe it's not genocide, but it's like you're still like just taking away from like the culture. And I think like one example that I had like based off your question was I went to Senegal 4 or 5 years ago, and it's in West Africa, and we were talking to community members. I lived in the village for 2 weeks, and we were helping build a primary school. And I look back at the trip now, and I was really young and I didn't have like any of the knowledge that I have now, and I think about like the power dynamic that there was, right, coming in as a American, right, like what that I had a lot to offer, right, but I remember the one encounter that I had with one of the translators and one of the, I believe it was one of the elder people from the village, and how they had been working with, I don't remember who, I think it might have been the same NGO I was with at the time, with people from the NGO. They were teaching them how to go and talk with like politicians in Senegal and the government, and that they finally came to an agreement that Senegal was responsible for building like schools in all the villages there. Unfortunately, I like haven't followed up with like how that's been progressing. Has Senegal been like actually like following up with like that law and like, imposing it and like building these schools, right? But like at least that was like a positive encounter I had, where like these people from this NGO were like giving them the knowledge to say like, all right, well let's think about like what your argument can be, why Senegal should invest in this, right? And they got it. So.
I think even Asha for education, we do a lot of that, you know, as we provide money so they can build schools there, people there can build schools there. So it's
Yeah, I think like one thing I read an article one time about, I can't remember the exact statistics, but it was basically like an article about how we have these groups of like white people who go to countries, you know, where poor brown people live, and you send over these kids, basically high school, college age kids who have never built anything in their life, but for some reason feel as though they are entitled to go and bring these communities back to life, you know, and never stop to ask themselves why the communities are like that in the first place, or why they're the ones who are responsible for going in and like saving these people. So, you know, it's been brought up like the white savior complex, but I think the United States needs to learn how to be a good ally, because I feel like most of the time the United States is like the loudest white person in the room who like goes in and is like, no, I'll fix you, and they're like, well, we actually need, they're like, no, it'll be great, and they never take the time to listen, and they think that, you know, they know everything, and they are actually the reason that most of these, you know, countries are in the situations that they're in, like it's been said. So
yeah, and like I was also reading an article once about like people really question like white savior complex. Like this is like legit stuff, y'all. Like this is like psychological in people's head. Like this statistic was like talking about how like CEOs from like major NGOs like here in the U.S. like are target like marginalized communities who tend to be people of color, right? Like not only here but abroad, and how 90% of the people in power in all those NGOs are white people, or specifically white men, and how a majority of them actually think that they are better than the people they are helping and that they are serving. So it's like, you know, like, yes, we have a responsibility, but like,
Don't let it
don't,
get
yeah, don't be like a douche about it. Like, really, like, don't like think, like, don't look down on these people because like we're the reason they're there. Like, you know.
There's also like a weird, you know how like when someone gives you a gift and you feel like you owe them something, right? Like that's also a thing with like humanitarian aid. Like when you give humanitarian aid, there's gonna be some little discomfort there, and so we also have to kind of try to break down that discomfort and be like, and so it's like a sociological like weirdness that happens that with gift giving, that like, oh, we feel like we owe a person something for doing something for us. So that's also part of the reason that like you want to make sure that you want to give the opportunity or have the opportunity for them to have their voices heard. Because like when you give them something and you're just like, all right, bye, and like then there's not really much space for them to really return anything. And that, although like you don't want stuff back, like you obviously whenever you help someone you never want anything back, but like that's also denying them the agency to do something for themselves. So.
Last question? Sure. I mean, the last question we kind of answered.
Kind of covered right now.
I guess I can combine the last two questions.
Sure.
First of all, this is to everybody. Has anybody experienced any barriers to accessing education if you're comfortable talking about it, how did you overcome or have you overcome them? Do you see yourself in any of the girls? And I guess the last question is, how can we, these people in this room, play a part in, you know, increasing access to education for girls and opportunities for girls? So it's like a bunch of questions that I just mixed together. Basically, give us your final
Your
thoughts.
personal insight.
Yeah.
And your FaceTime that you'd like to talk
Even the panelists.
about. Yeah.
I want to be in the room.
Yeah, me too.
Speak.
It's like, this is like, one thing I do see, especially when I went to, 2 weeks back, I went to this Mission of Mercy down in New Haven. It was basically a community service that was happening throughout Connecticut, where they were giving out free dental care to and pretty much anyone who lives around the area or anyone who visits there. And you know, my role in this entire thing as a volunteer was to register each person who came into the Mission of Mercy. And one thing I realized was after talking to some of these people, they tell us, you know, in terms of healthcare and getting dental care, access to it wasn't a problem in our country. It's the fact that it's kind of turning to a point where capitalism is playing a huge influence in how we give out healthcare. With some of these people, because I'm inspired to become a dentist one day, and one of the people, there was a husband and wife, and they just had like, there was a 6-month daughter that was there, and they were saying, and I was just talking to them, you know, what kind of care did they get? And they said that they haven't seen a dentist in over 10 years. And I asked them, you know, well, why is that? And, you know, I just asked them, you know, plainly, you know, what happened, what caused that? And they said because one of the dentists that was working at the Mercy refused to give them care because they couldn't pay the bills to get, for example, a filling or tooth removed because of decay. And that really shocked me because, you know, when we're given the opportunity to pursue a passion through our education, such as becoming a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer, a politician, any of those things, it has to be a reason why we're doing it. And one thing I realized is that when you're going to all of these programs, or if you're going to other countries to do humanitarian efforts, you not only can you, like what everyone's been reiterating the past few questions, is that you can't just come in there, do your thing, and be like, oh, I'm here to, you know, inspire you guys, I'm trying to save you guys. You can't, it's not gonna work, especially when there's a huge cultural clash between people. The way in which I've seen some people implement it and seen it, because after watching a lot of things on education, how people promote it in other countries, is by actually starting off with the awareness events and inviting like a whole village, or even going to, for example, I talked to a dentist one time who went to a church in the area, I think it was in Chile. And he said that since they don't have any areas that people can come together, there was a village in that particular area he was in, everyone was invited to go to that church, you know, to talk to them about, you know, what the importance of healthcare is, and also, you know, other things that he was doing. And so one thing I would say is key in terms of raising awareness about the education and making sure that people, and all girls and, you know, boys too, get equal education is the fact that you start off with communication. Communication is key to a lot of things in order for something to be promoted and also to gain awareness in other people's perspectives. Second thing is how you inspire people. Tell them what's the reasoning behind all of this, and don't tell them, like, you know, just because you're there because you see these kind of problems. Because you can tell someone, you know, they lack this, and this, but you gotta tell them, okay, now we can encourage them to do better, or tell them how they can do better, and teach them. Because even if you're there for, like, maybe, you know, if you're going to another country and giving and helping them in some way, such as, you know, building schools and whatnot, you could be there for that time and, you know, help them and teach them while showing them that this is how you can do it. And then so you leave, by the time you leave, they can spread that in their own villages and to areas around around where they're living. And I think by doing so, it can not only permeate, but it'll show that there's a reasoning behind why people come to these countries to help.
So just to relate to that, back to Asha, I think that when you talk about awareness, that's really our biggest responsibility, and it's little things like these events that I think really start to get people talking and just having a conversation about it. Like, I don't think 4 years ago the same number of people that I talked to these issues about even knew that these existed, and myself included. Like, I was definitely much more ignorant about this at the beginning of my college career than now. And I think that because we have a platform, like we have an institution like as big as UConn, we should really utilize it to start these conversations. And doing that, like small little thing like that, can really start the process of change. So, because like going to India and giving these girls an education, like that's the main goal. But like you have to start like small. It's not something like, all right, I want to do that. Let's do it. So we know that we've faced like many barriers. You know, there's funding. There's a proper way to get into that society without like insulting them and still want to make change. So yeah.
So just to echo that, I think conversations are most important and the littlest but the easiest way we can help out, where we raise awareness within our friends groups or within our family. So I know for at home, me and my brother always try to have conversations with our parents about things that they don't understand that we're exposed to, especially about like my gender role in the family and in society. They expect something different out of me, and then I have my own expectations, right? So having conversations with my parents helps the whole family kind of move towards where both sides are accepted, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Totally understand.
Yeah.
Like it's all like like when it comes to like raising awareness and conversation and like deconstructing your identity, that's like it's very important. But once you in that process as well, we also need to get to the point where like we're willing to take direct action, willing to take like join an organization and like actually show up to things, because like, you can learn a lot. And I was like this too. I was a very hardcore academic when it came to like human rights and when it came to women, gender, sexuality studies. I was hardcore, like never gonna be an activist whatsoever, because I was like, everything's problematic, I can't deal with it, I'm gonna just stay here. But the change starts from below, change starts from grassroots movements. So even Asha for Education is one thing, but there's also grassroots movements that occur in the US that is trying to uplift education equity for, or like healthcare access or whatever within the US for like people of color or whatever. So like along with these conversations and awareness campaigns, also you get involved in direct action. Like we need bodies, we need people.
It's crazy though, like honestly, it's one event or like one class. Like I'm taking my first women in gender science class this semester, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm the greatest feminist ever, but like I literally was not that 4 months ago. So it's really just about, you just need exposure to it once you're aware of it and you start conversation, like you never know how many people can join that.
And learning is a constant process.
Yeah.
Like you never stop learning, no matter how much you get involved in anything. Like so, like with that in mind, just like join movements and realize that you're gonna make mistakes, but be okay with those mistakes. And
that's a very good point.
And I think that's an important part of college, to discover all that and not just be focused on one goal, but to expand your horizons and to understand everybody around you.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the stuff that I've talked about like today's and like this panel, like a lot of stuff that I learned that like being actively involved with the community, it wasn't really like in the classroom, like, and so because I don't know, like we were like talking in one of my classes on Thursday, I believe, right, and like like I constantly recognize my privilege that I have access to university level education, right? How like universities a lot of time are kind of like a threat to like, I guess like government, because this is like a place for us to like really like thrive, and like how Prasanna mentioned, like we start becoming really critical of like these values and beliefs that we're taught like growing up, right? And so I became really critical of that when I got like involved with Connecticut Students for a Dream, and they're working on like their institutional aid bill, which is helping undocumented students have access to higher education, and like really being able to like learn what I learned outside, and like going to class and being like, oh, that's because like that is why I experienced that outside. Like I am able to like connect all these things together. And so like I think first I want to bring up the point of like being activist is very important because it like, at least for me personally, it really allows me to like bring what I learned in the classroom to life, right? And it brings like faces and bodies and experiences and tears and laugh and like laughter and growth and pain and everything, right? Like literally just like the beauty of life, like honestly, like so yeah, I think like, but going back to like the last question, right? Like I think I had a really easy time like accessing like school here in the U.S. like growing up here, and that's like one of the main reasons why my parents like never went back to their countries, even though they were undocumented. They were just like, your education is so much better here, so like we're just like not gonna go back. And because like at least in Guatemala, like where my mom is from, you have to pay for primary and secondary schooling, and so like to me that's like, I don't know, like mind blowing because we don't have that here in the U.S. Like I don't have to like go to school and like pay a monthly fee and then pay for a uniform, right? And so, but I think access to education is like very different to everyone because although I did have access to like an elementary, middle, and high school, I really struggled getting the right education. So I was constantly put into these classes where I felt like I was belittled and I wasn't being challenged, and I was constantly arguing with my teachers because they're like, you're not motivated, you're not doing this, and it's like, well, you're not giving me what I want to learn, or you're not challenging me enough so I don't feel engaged, so therefore I will like not be involved, right? And so like I think it's also like keeping that in mind that access is like very different to everyone, like what, like physically being inside of school, but then like what you're actually learning in the classroom at what level, you know? Yeah.
Thank you. So, well,
We can wrap it up if anyone has last one. Like if you guys want to add anything really
last
Yeah.
person, last.
Well, I was gonna say that I think awareness is really important on like both sides of the spectrum. So even if you have access to a great education, being aware that this is still an issue is just as important as if you don't have access to it. Because there was this one documentary I was watching called Horror's Glory, and it was about these women in like a prostitution home, and just it was documenting their life and what they go through. And the issue was that I saw kept occurring is that a lot of these women didn't even know any better. Like they thought that this was just how life is, and like some of them were born into that home. So like they didn't know what a school was. They didn't even know that it was possible to have a life outside. They didn't know. They just had no idea. So I think for them it's just as important that they're aware of what options they have, as well as for us to be aware that this is a situation that happens. So.
Yeah. Yes.
All these issues, I feel like people just need to get over the uncomfortableness of talking about that.
Yeah.
Like once people get over that, then we can actually impact other people.
You have people saying racism still doesn't exist. Like
Yeah.
that. Like there's people
And
like.
it's just like, if it's not in front of their face, they're not going to talk about it because they don't want to deal with it, I guess.
Yeah.
And I just feel like if you get over that uncomfortableness and realize that these issues are still prevalent, then you can do something.
Okay, and with that, I guess that's the end of our
That's the
segment.
end. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming here to watch a movie. I know it was a really long event, but I got a lot out of it. There's a lot of free food still. So take what
And thank
want.
you for facilitating.
Thank you.
Yay!